Well, today we're diving into a strategic shift unfolding right before our eyes. Canada and Mexico are launching a multi-billion-dollar trade offensive aimed at bypassing the U.S., building the Northern Corridor valued at approximately $120 billion, a move that could shake up North American trade dynamics, a true revolution. On February 1st, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order imposing nearly 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, with oil and gas at 10%. A few days later, the U.S. added a 25% tariff on imported steel and aluminum, threatening to extend it to cars, chips, and pharmaceuticals. The response from Canada and Mexico was swift. Canada retaliated with a 25% countermeasure, while Mexico initially responded slowly, but eventually opened bilateral talks through the USMCA. On July 16, 2025, Mexico and Canada officially confirmed their strengthened cooperation. President Claudia Sheinbaum and Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to add more bilateral mechanisms to counter new U.S. tariffs set to take effect on August 1st. The plan, now circulating under the name Northern Corridor, is estimated to be worth $120 billion. The goal is clear: create a trade route completely bypassing the U.S., including railways, ports, logistics, and a digital customs system based on blockchain to facilitate direct import and export between Canada and Mexico. The basic design, connecting Prince Rupert, Canada, to the ports of Manzanillo or Veracruz, Mexico, spanning approximately 10,000 kilometers, with multiple transport methods, rail, virtual customs borders, dry ports, and completely excluding U.S. CBP gates. According to an analysis published on the Lodestar, if the Northern Corridor project is fully implemented and operational within the next 5 years, the U.S. could face severe economic losses of up to $245 billion. Specifically, this includes around $69 billion in lost direct tax revenue, $17 billion in lost indirect economic benefits, and $39 billion in job losses, especially in manufacturing and logistics industries reliant on cross-border supply chains. In this overall picture, the U.S. Midwest region will be hit hardest, with its GDP projected to drop by about 2.8% due to supply chain disruptions and domestic suppliers withdrawing from the existing trade network. Before the corridor is operational, Washington still collects stable revenue, estimated at $2.5 to $4 billion annually through U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP fees, including processing and merchandise taxes. However, once the Northern Corridor goes live, the flow of goods will bypass the CBP system entirely, meaning these revenue sources will vanish from the U.S. federal budget. The impact of U.S. tariff policies is creating a clear wave of shifts in the North American supply chain, particularly in the automotive and manufacturing industries. According to recent surveys, 41% of U.S. automotive parts suppliers said they are seriously considering relocating part or all of their production to Canada or Mexico if current tariffs continue into late 2025. This reflects deep concerns over rising costs and the instability of U.S. trade policies. A typical example is General Motors, GM, in Ontario, which had to halt its BrightDrop EV production line and lay off 1,200 workers. Of these, at least 500 may not be rehired until after October, as the plant is transitioning to produce next-gen batteries expected to roll out in 2026. One of the key strategic advantages of the Northern Corridor is its single-window digital system, based on blockchain technology, which allows Canada and Mexico to exchange customs data directly with each other, bypassing the U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) system. This not only increases security and autonomy for both nations, but also causes the U.S. to lose a significant revenue source of about $1.26 billion annually, mainly from merchandise processing fees. In 2024, CBP processed about 38.4 million trade declarations, and being bypassed completely would cause this revenue to disappear from the federal budget. Beyond the financial aspect, Operational efficiency is also a major advantage of the new system. A United Nations study shows that adopting an electronic single-window model can shorten customs clearance times from 3-5 days to under 24 hours, saving hours on each shipment and greatly increasing shipping efficiency across the entire transnational logistics chain. This is a powerful boost, not just technically, but politically against the traditional U.S.-controlled trade model. Canada and Mexico are heavily investing in infrastructure to make the Northern Corridor a reality, an independent trade route free from U.S. dependence. In 2025, the Canadian government proposed a $5 billion CAD fund named the Trade Diversification Corridor Fund to develop new logistics routes and reduce reliance on cross-border trade with the U.S. A large portion of this fund is allocated to upgrading the Prince Rupert port, which currently handles about 23 million tons of goods annually. This summer, Canada further invested $2.5 billion Canadian dollars to expand infrastructure at the port, including a high-speed rail system and automated warehouses, aimed at speeding up goods flow through the Western Corridor. To the south, Mexico has officially approved a $1.6 billion investment package to upgrade key ports like Veracruz, Altamira, and Manzanillo, and accelerate the construction of the Sonora-Durango Superhighway, a strategic transport corridor linking the Pacific to Mexico's interior. Manzanillo Port is undergoing a large-scale renovation to double its handling capacity to 10 million TEUs annually, with completion expected by the end of 2025. With these investments, both Canada and Mexico are synchronizing their logistics infrastructure on an unprecedented scale, laying a solid foundation for a new trade axis that doesn't rely on U.S. territory, both geographically and administratively. According to reports from Reuters and the Lodestar, if the Northern Corridor is fully operational as expected, about 10% of the total trade value between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico could shift to this new system. Specifically, in 2024, total trade between the U.S. and Canada was valued at $762 billion, and with Mexico at $839.9 billion. So 10% of these two trade flows would amount to around $160 billion annually, an enormous figure if it were to be pulled out of the U.S. logistics and customs control system. This will have a clear financial impact. The reduction or complete elimination of customs declarations at U.S. CBP gates will cause the revenues from import duties, processing fees, and other trade charges to essentially vanish from the federal budget. Notably, in fiscal year 2023, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, collected about $92.3 billion from these taxes and fees, second only to the IRS, in federal revenue contributions. When the Northern Corridor trade route is fully operational, expected in 2028, but with some segments potentially running trials earlier, the U.S. will no longer control customs for most of the goods moving between Canada and Mexico. This means businesses still relying on the traditional route through the U.S. will face higher costs, losing tariff advantages and incurring additional delays and administrative costs. This will put significant pressure, especially on production centers deep within the U.S., like steel mills in the Midwest, battery factories in Monterrey, Mexico, and auto suppliers in Michigan. These areas are gradually turning into off-border dependencies, as their raw materials and supply chains are increasingly drawn out of the U.S.-controlled trade system. Even before the corridor is officially operational, its impact is already evident through market disruptions. General Motors, GM, had to temporarily halt its BrightDrop EV production line, a significant setback in the company's green production strategy. Meanwhile, logistics companies saw a 30% drop in cargo throughput at the Los Angeles and Long Beach ports in the most recent month alone.